Donkey Kong has had possibly the most interesting development of any Nintendo mascot. I can't think of anyone whose definition has changed so much, going from villain to damsel to hero to heel to ensemble cast member. Donkey Kong is somewhat nebulous in the Nintendo family, a character who sometimes feels satellite to Mario, but also has a world of his own in his own personal corner of a massive universe. And we owe this expansive world building to Rareware's Donkey Kong Country, which cemented Donkey Kong as a hero in his own right and built the unforgettable world of the DK Isles. It's a little bit hard for me personally to reflect on Donkey Kong Country since I wasn't born for another 3 years after its release. I'm not sure how people reacted to the once rival figure Donkey Kong becoming a hero of his own world, but reportedly, the buzz around the game is one I wish I could have experienced, as Rare's innovative emulation of 3D graphics using trace sprites was a visual breakthrough at its inception, allowing the world and inhabitants of the DK Isles to practically breathe on screen. The story of Donkey Kong Country at first glance could not be more straightforward. The quest to retrieve your beloved bananas when they've been reappropriated by the vile Kremlings, led by King K. Rool. This is pretty typical platformer fare, but what really tells the story of Donkey Kong is the lush environment you adventure through to put a stop to the pilfering of your potassium-rich nourishment. What strikes me anytime I revisit Donkey Kong Country is how surprisingly infrequent enemies who are clearly affiliated with the Kremlings are. Almost just as consistent are seemingly miscellaneous pests like zingers and naughties. This feels almost represented by the boss fights, which each occur with a plus-sized version of one of these garden variety enemies. And what occurred to me mulling this over is the fact that Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong aren't traversing a strange land, but their own island. It's the Kremlings who are invading, and as such, seem like thin-spread interlopers, relying on the natural perils of forests and wildlife to stand in the Kong family's way. It's in this way that Donkey Kong seems to represent a morally neutral and yet reverently natural stance in the spectrum. To preserve the food source of his kind, he has little choice but to tear through the natural habitats of animals who have their own prerogative to protect. The necky birds and dotties seem like they'd leave well enough alone if it weren't for foreign factors, but Donkey Kong has no choice but to defend himself if it'll mean clearing his island of the Kremlings and protecting his coveted bananas. This is reflected further by the brilliant soundtrack of the game, with serene soundtracks like Aquatic Ambience and Sticker Brush Symphony suggesting an everyday life for these areas that's peaceful and even beautiful, only exposed to chaos by the machinations of the Kremlings, forcing the Kongs into action. And yet, not every naturally inclined creature is against the Kongs, as our heroes encounter animal buddies who will help them achieve their goals. Rambi the Rhino will give you a ride, On Guard the Swordfish will help you traverse underwater, and Wiki the Frog will help you reach new heights. These are weirdly reflective of symbiotic relationships, often observed in wildlife, where many odd couples of animal species will instinctively help one another through mutual benefit. Animals are far more complex than we give them credit for, and their modus operandi is not as clear cut as personal survival, principle reflected in the relationships within Donkey Kong's forest quests. This all comes back to the true villain causing this chaos, King K. Rool, who defines his hedonistic and greedy personality when you first encounter his boss battle, where his boat is littered with the skins of bananas he's stolen. Moreover, Donkey Kong never would have come to blows with the other animals of the island had K. Rool not disrupted the ecosystem. Many of the levels of Donkey Kong Country are reflective of the Kremlin clan's industrial warping of the island. Borrowed mines where they can carry on building and chemical pumping, as well as no doubt pollutive power plants in the form of Kremkrock Industries. K. Rool not only seeks to rob the Kongs of their resources and expose them to unruly nature, but to turn the cleared out land masses into means for his own further construction and material gain, which feels so much more insidious put together than his mere banana thievery at face value, because it reflects how capital endeavors impact real world wildlife. After he sends the Kremlings packing for the first time, Donkey Kong has little time to rest, as he's kidnapped by the vengeful K. Rool, which forces Diddy Kong, along with his new companion Dixie, to save him from the mysterious waters of Crocodile Isle. While the Kremlings were last time infiltrating the Kong's turf, the dynamic has switched and now has the murky and desolate Crocodile Isle as the setting, giving the Kremlings an intimidating home field advantage. The Kremlings feel far more present in this game considering the heroes are now under their roof. Even non-reptilian foes such as Crow and the boat-scuttering rats feel more like they're aligned with your foes, and by extension more personally inclined to halt your Kong quest. Also reflective of the strange land Diddy and Dixie must traverse is how vital their animal buddies become in this game. As they make their way through the hives of the Zinger species and inhospitable stickerbrush domains, they find their environments are harder and harder to survive within because the sheer foreign nature of these areas, hardly able to pull their feet from the Zingers' massive honey reserves, and not even able to touch the massive groves of thorns throughout the Crocodile Isle Gardens. These aren't areas the two Kongs were meant to thrive within, making their adventure feel all the more difficult to scale, and their relationship with the likes of Squawk, Scramby, and On Guard feel invaluable. Levels that aren't naturally deadly are industrially so. Where in Donkey Kong Country we saw the beginnings of the Kremlings' overbuilding and detrimental manufacturing on DK Isle, in Crocodile Isle we see a place where it was allowed to be built to completion, resulting in the indulgent and dangerous Crazy Kremland, and K. Rool's extravagant and death trap-filled castles, the likes of which would have no doubt begun to flood the Congo jungle had Donkey Kong not put a stop to the Kremlings. The way the coasters in the Kremlings amusement parks fall apart and lead right into hazards, coupled with the thrilling pirate ship levels, often leading upward due to the rising tides over a failing boat, all reflects the Kremlings as beings who place their self-serving satisfaction over any form of rationale or safety. Whether it's stealing bananas or creating disastrous factories, they are the embodiment of cold-blooded desires to go bigger as opposed to smarter. Even on a smaller scale, Cranky and Wrinkly Kong now own a Kong classroom and museum, means to educate the younger and less experienced Kongs in a new setting without their older counterpart Donkey Kong, or the comfort of a familiar setting. K. Rool continues to live up to the pun of his name, as this encounter begins with him torturing a chained up Donkey Kong with his blunderbuss, an actually rather grisly sight for a Donkey Kong game, and one that connects K. Rool to another pillar of self-serving industrialism, the cruelty and captivity of animals, a theme that was hinted at by the consistent motif of your Kong companions being trapped within barrels upon capture, waiting to be freed. King K. Rool, after being bested twice, proves himself to be carrying at least a few more brain cells than the likes of Bowser, as he takes his next plan a step further, kidnapping both Donkey and Diddy Kong in what he hopes will be his finest hour in Donkey Kong Country 3. Dixie now has only the infantile Kiddy Kong to rely on as they venture toward the Northern Cremisphere. These new settings and characters caused Country 3 to be viewed as something of a red-headed stepchild among its peers in the trilogy, but what I love is how vulnerable the less experienced Dixie and downright juvenile Kiddy feel in yet another large, strange world. It's not an uncommon occurrence that when animals are hunted or overcaptured, their young be ill-fated to fend for themselves in the wild, and emphasizing a duo of two young Kongs in Country 3 reflects how alone and lost the all too often occurring orphaned animals can be. And while DK Isle was a lush rainforest and Crocodile Isle is a pungent swamp, the Northern Cremisphere feels like a western wilderness, which allows for imagery that feels blatantly bigger in sheer scale, with massive trees and bodies of water. While the first two games emphasize danger from sparing land to nimbly traverse, the two smallest Kongs have to deal with the biggest and most daunting environments. Once more, Dixie and Kitty have friends in the animal buddies, but the symbiotic dynamic is made bizarrely more real to life as the buddies now have incorporated returns the Kongs must make for their help. Ellie the elephant must be kept away from the mice she so dreads, and Nibla needs to be fed in order to continue helping the Kongs. Also introduced are the brothers Bear, who will provide assistance to the Kongs in exchange for favors. These are the first animal buddies who are truly symbiotic because the relationships go both ways, adding dynamic to the gameplay surrounding the characters and layers to the relationships therein. And while the bosses of the first game were naturalistic and seemingly self-defensive, and those of Country 2 being more along the lines of those in service to King K. Rool, Country 3's bosses feel like out-of-this-world nightmares. not really resembling any animal easily found in any kind of wilderness, and rather looking like red-eyed monsters, the likes of Belcha and Bleak in particular, feeling inexplicable in the world the first two games established, suiting that the bosses who were creepiest on a surface level be saved for the most vulnerable protagonists, the ones who need the most bravery to carry on. This is further reflected by the third persona K. Rool takes on, while King K. Rool represents his opulence and Captain K. Rool his penchant for taking what isn't his. As Baron K. Rulenstein, K. Rool becomes the creator and chieftain of horror that younger, less complex eyes would view a wicked Ogliarch, a creator of wicked creations and creatures as well as malicious kidnapper. Some say Country 3 lost a lot of its predecessor's subtleties and moody environments, and I think this is true and yet fitting to the less mature eyes of Dixie and Kitty, helping one really view the adventure through their eyes. K. Rool is a far more complex foe than he seems to the protagonists of 3, which is why they see him as a wicked supervillain rather than the stand-in for toxic industrialism who foils the embodiment of noble naturalism. This all makes up the ideal that is precisely Donkey Kong's strength as a hero. In recent years, especially when set against the Mario ensemble, he's stereotyped as a wild animal and troublemaker as well as a hard partier. I don't think this is a bad thing because a gorilla among humans absolutely would seem wild and precocious. I think it's neat, though, that Donkey Kong has a protective and even sort of stern side to him when it comes to his own home. As rambunctious as he seems among Mario and company, he's never hesitated to help his family or save his island. I think these sides of him can easily coexist, and it's plain to see how Donkey Kong so adamantly defends his home because the world of the Congo jungle and the Donkey Kong universe teems with life, which is exactly why I feel Donkey Kong Country's world building soars leaps and bounds above other platformers.